Today's webinar. My name is Matt Bichelle, Director of Product and Corporate Marketing at Nlyte Software. Welcome to the 7 high-impact problems in the data center. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Mark Giddes, the Chief Marketing Officer at Nlyte. As CMO, he leads Nlyte's worldwide marketing strategy and execution. Mark has over 20 years of enterprise software marketing experience, where he previously served as SVP of Marketing at Engine Yard, and has held a variety of executive marketing roles at enterprise companies that you may recognize, such as Oracle, SAP, and Comergent. Since we're running on a tight path, I want to go ahead and give the reins over to Mark. Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for the time you're going to be spending with us. We're going to be going pretty quickly here. We had advertised this as a 20-minute webinar. I suggest if you have any questions, please do submit them, but we wanted to keep it very short, very compact. I think we've all done webinars where people just sort of go on and on forever and ever, like Patrick Stewart in the Star Trek episode. So today's agenda, we're actually going to do a quick introduction to Nlyte. We'll talk about sort of the changes that are occurring in the data center and have been for the last few years. And then we'll talk about sort of the arrival of sort of DSIM over the last 10 years and really what it is. But the bulk of the time will be spent sort of on 7 common use cases or problems customers have in the data center. We'll talk about how they use DSIM to solve those problems, and the bulk of the presentation, as I said, will be focused on this. So without further ado, we will move to the next slide. So a quick introduction to Nlyte. Nlyte is a leading provider of data center infrastructure management solutions. This is abbreviated as DSIM. We were the first company with a modern DSIM solution. We focused on this market for over 10 years, and as a result, we have some of the largest and the most sophisticated data center deployments with DSIM in the world. We recently, Gartner came out with a Magic Quadrant on DSIM, and there were 4 leaders in the leadership quadrant, and Nlyte is the only dedicated DSIM provider in the leadership quadrant. It's all we do. Our company's success is completely dependent on our DSIM solutions providing value to our customers. We don't have a hardware agenda. We don't have other software to sell. This is what we do, and we do it well, and as a result, we have some great customers, as you can see on the bottom of this particular slide. So if you think about data centers in the last few years, things have changed quite a bit. And this is my own sort of going down memory lane. The picture here is actually of a Sequent server. When I worked in the Oracle data center, we actually had 2 Sequent servers, ProdSeq 1 and ProdSeq 2, and a storage array that basically took care of a majority of Oracle's financials. So it was pretty amazing that these 2 servers took care of such a large business. And for the most part, data centers were pretty static at that time across the world, right? There were relatively small budgets, wasn't much constraint by space and energy relative to today, very tactical, and compared to today, those environments were relatively slow-paced and not very complex compared to today. Now, turn the clock forward, and today what you find is there are a lot of initiatives going on in companies, mobile, big data, you name it, right? E-commerce, all sorts of initiatives in organizations that are happening, doing social, doing Internet of Things, all these amazing sort of initiatives coming out of the business, and as a result, it's making it very challenging for data centers because data centers are having to react. It's much more higher paced. So as I was saying, so the data centers become a very dynamic place, and as a result, sort of DSIM evolved to sort of help companies manage a lot of that data center infrastructure. And if you think about, there's a definition here from Wikipedia, but I think the best thing to think of it is at the highest level you have ITSM solutions like CMDB, service management, asset management that are attempting to help companies at a higher level manage their IT service delivery. And you're managing things like virtualization, applications, and service requests. But below there, you get into the data center infrastructure management where you're dealing with assets within the data center. But it's more than just sort of an application. It ties into your asset information if you're have barcode information, RFID, And additionally, you're tying into facility information such as power, cooling, and environmentals. And this goes into your DSIM solution and then feeds the processes and workflows you have within data center infrastructure management. And of course, there's communication back and forth through, between ITSM and between DSIM. So today's webinar is very focused on sort of the main use cases and the main problems that DSIM tends to solve.
Okay, Mark. So now I'd like to actually launch a poll to get a pulse here for those on the line. So hopefully the, folks can see this poll. Go ahead and vote for any of these. So which of these problems do you have in the data center? Knowing exactly where assets are and what to do with them, how to consolidate assets. Do you have problems with compliance? Are you running out of power, and or do you have issues with the power of ghosts? Do you have issues with how to consistently manage assets across data centers or teams? So I'll give teams a second to vote here. I'll give it a little more time while I'm getting some answers in. And I will go ahead and close the poll and then hopefully share it with everyone. So it looks like 50%, Mark, are having kind of these issues of knowing where assets are. A little over a third, 36%, of how to consolidate assets. 29% are wanting to know about compliance. Identical number about concerns about power. And then a great majority are looking to consistently manage assets across teams or data centers. So pretty interesting.
Great. So the webinar is done. No, I'm just kidding. We will be getting to sort of these items in the upcoming slides. So if we can go to the next slide. So as I said before, so DSIM is really there to solve specific problems in the data center. And so the number one thing we hear from customers when I've talked to customers and I ask, so why are you using DSIM? The number one answer is sort of sounds very basic, but it's sort of critical and the linchpin to everything. They want to know, where are my data center assets? They fundamentally need to know where the different resources are within the data center, and as the data centers get more dynamic, that's getting more challenging to do. So I chose a Midwest industrial manufacturer who uses Nlyte. They had an interesting experience. They were managing things with spreadsheets, and they outsourced some of their IT to IBM, and IBM came in and did a data center audit and found that 52% of the data in their spreadsheets was actually inaccurate. Either the resources indicated were not the actual resources being used, or the location where the resources were indicated to be weren't actually there. And so this caused a bit of a hubbub at the company, and they said, look, we need to figure out a way to manage this with a certain level of discipline. And so they turned to a DSIM solution. They turned to Nlyte, and they implemented in order to programmatically track where assets are located. And the key thing we like to say is DSIM isn't just a solution, it's sort of a mindset. You have to decide, hey, we want to put the processes in place to have the discipline, so we're tracking all these things with a lot of benefits, of course, with making things more efficient, make yourselves more accountable, make yourselves able to be more agile. But they did this, they implemented Nlyte, it gave them improved visibility, it created searchability where they can now find assets by just putting in the name or putting in a particular type of resource. And they've established periodic reports that allow them to generate reports on all the assets, not just for the data center, but for operations and also for finance. So the natural next sort of step for a lot of companies, the next sort of problem they have is, hey, great, I know where my assets are, but where should I put new assets? I have new resources coming in, and I want to know where I should place them inside my data center. And so I'm using a mid-market insurance company that uses Nlyte. They needed to efficiently be able to add assets and make changes, but allow the system to help tell them where they should optimally place infrastructure, really based on the type of resources being deployed, what type of power needs that particular or space that particular resource is going to require itself. So this is where, again, they turn to Nlyte, and they implemented DSIM in order to programmatically track where assets should be placed. So now, instead of going to a spreadsheet and figuring out where's their space, where's their energy, they can now log in, specify the type of resource they want to place, and then the system intelligently figures it out and can automatically optimize where that particular resource should be placed. Of course, it can also generate the workflow as to how that particular asset should be actually placed and installed and configured. So this, as I said, is sort of a natural second sort of step a lot of companies take. After they know where their assets, of course, they want to start adding them in sort of an optimal way. The next sort of problem we find a lot of companies ask about is sort of, again, evolving a little further down the path is, how do we consolidate assets? And so I chose in this particular case a Fortune 100 high-tech company that uses Enlight. They had, I think, about a dozen different data centers, but they acquired a company with 3 additional data centers and had this challenge. How do they manage sort of not only the planning and the actual consolidation of these assets that they were managing across all these different data centers? And sort of the rub in this was they were told you get no additional personnel, which is pretty much my experience in the data center was always the case, right? You never got new resources for that new project. And so they already had Enlight, so it was very easy for them to basically programmatically incorporate the new data centers, include those particular resources, determine what the needs were and where the new resources were coming from, what were the actual requirements, and then they could not only plan how to consolidate, where different servers and resources and racks were going to be placed, but they also could implement the actual changes using the workflow within Enlight. And then they took all that information and fed it up into the CMDB so that the ITSM system, the IT Service Management System, would have the latest information on all these resources. So it not only helps with the planning, but it also helps with the sort of the execution of doing that consolidation. So the fourth problem we find a lot of folks have is dealing with compliance, right? There are a variety of compliance initiatives out there, from PCI to Sarbanes-Oxley to FASB. But this Fortune 500 company in the travel industry was asked to show compliance to an ISO 27001 initiative the company had. And when they dug into the spreadsheets, what they found was an extensive, a very large number of errors in where the assets were physically located. And they, in essence, had no audit trail whatsoever of where the assets had changed, where they were moving. And sort of in a strange draconian knee-jerk, the finance department heard about this and said they were freezing all purchase of new assets until somebody could explain how they were going to have better accountability of what was going on in the data center. So at this point, they've been sort of toying with getting a DSIM solution, but this sort of pushed them over the edge. And once they indicated they were going to go with a DSIM solution, then finance turned off the freeze, so that's good. And then they implemented the DSIM solution, which then established asset interrelationships, ownership, the supported business, and they could show historical changes going on in the data center, which is a key part, is having an audit trail for compliance. They also synchronize this information into a central CMDB, and they've actually granted access. About 3/4 to 80% of the people who use the system only have read access. They're able to log in and just take a look at information within the system. So the overall story was they were able to take care of this part of the compliance initiative, being able to state where the assets are and where they're moving around, which is at sort of the lowest level of ISO 27001. So then another sort of problem we see companies have, and when we talk to Gartner, we talk to some of the Gartner analysts who handle DSIM, they'll often say this is sort of the #1 thing they often get asked about regarding DSIM, which is the question or the challenge is, I'm running out of power, what do I do? And folks will turn to Gartner to get their advice. And so the challenge here is, so how do you do that, right? Like you're running out of power. And so we took as an example a Fortune 100 bank, very dynamic organization. Everyone on this call would know them. They are constantly introducing new applications, new services, and so the data center is continually trying to stay ahead of that and make sure they don't run out of capacity, energy, and space, and they're afraid they'll lose their heads if they aren't staying ahead of this particular very dynamic business group. And they want a way to intelligently plan for future growth and be able to stay ahead of the curve. Additionally, they wanted to capture stranded resources. Any sort of zombie servers, they want to actually capture the energy being used in those particular systems. So this is where they implemented Nlyte in order to plan and manage energy efficiency more effectively. And so they deployed the system. They're tied into environmental systems that do the real-time monitoring and feeding that into Nlyte. So now they're able to see this real-time information. They're able to see which assets are consuming the most resources. Additionally, they can plan more effectively as they know they're going to be adding new resources. They can see what's available. They can see what's upcoming. They can run what-if scenarios within Nlyte to plan for it. And additionally, they started identifying between their discovery tools and Nlyte, they're able to discover a variety of zombie servers out there that are really doing nothing that they can then take offline or redeploy in order to capture and reuse that energy. So the sixth sort of use case we see is sort of a slightly different version of that last one, which is companies that are interested. In this particular case, it was a Fortune 100 tech company that had 7 data centers with tens of thousands of assets managed. And what they wanted was they have this constantly changing data centers. And as a result, they felt like they had servers that they were paying service contracts to vendors, but the servers weren't actually running. But they needed a way to sort of reconcile that. And they wanted it to be a fast and easy way to accurately figure out what does the ITSM asset management say we have versus what does our DSEM solution say we actually have running. And so they used their existing DSEM solution to reconcile with what was their ERP system. So their asset management is in their ERP. And what they were able to do was they found dozens of zombie servers not in use, but actually had service contracts, which this was just flipping out accounting and finance, the idea that we're paying for service contracts at things that aren't even running. Initially, they did this with a file extraction. They took Nlyte, they extracted the assets, names and IDs, and then took that over to the ERP system and then could run a reconciliation to determine these zombie servers. But now they're looking at automating that, so ongoing they don't have to extract an actual file. They actually would like that to be ongoing live with an integration. So the last sort of case we see, and it came up in the poll that Matt just did earlier, is a lot of companies just are like, hey, how do I create consistency in how we manage assets, how we decommission them, how we install them, how we change their locations. So in this particular case, I'm taking sort of a gargantuan Fortune 100 telecom company with 17 data centers worldwide. And they, in essence, needed to do this. They needed a way to consistently decommission and deploy new assets according to very strict IT policies. They wanted to be capable of not only doing this, but directing and managing remote employees in these 17 data centers throughout the world. And of course, they wanted information to come back from those locations and have a consolidated view of everything that was going on with their data center infrastructure. So again, they use Nlyte to implement sort of intelligent workflow processes for changes to anything happening in the data center. So a typical process might be somebody wants to install 5 new racks of servers in Singapore. They'll go to the ITS system. They'll take that through the workflow of the ITSM system to get approval for those racks, and then it will go down into Nlyte. At that point, the users of Nlyte within this organization can allocate the work to different individuals worldwide using the built-in deep workflow that's built into Nlyte. And then the remote employees know, they get a notification, they're told what to do, what specific items they have to go through and check off, and then they report that back into Nlyte. And then this way the processes are consistent. everyone's using the same approach, but additionally that information is all being fed up into the internal system of Nlyte, and again, we take that information and feed it right back up into the ITSM system. So in this particular situation, this particular scenario, not only the process is consistent, but the information is consistent from the ITSM system down into the DSIM system. So in summary, the best way to sort of look at DSIM is it supports these different processes, but really is a central nervous system for the data center that can help you manage the assets, the planning, the changes, the processes, the workflow around anything going on with data center infrastructure within an organization. It's also there really to facilitate more discipline and structure around these infrastructure processes. And as I said earlier in the webinar, DSIM is more than just an application. It's actually sort of a mindset or an approach, and it's when companies reach a point where they say, hey, we want to have disciplined processes, we want to approach this in a more structured fashion. And in doing so, this investment helps them increase their agility, reduce the costs, ensure consistency, ensure that they can deliver the SLAs that the business needs, and generate greater accountability and visibility to the rest of the organization so everyone can see all the hard work that the data center is doing, and the data center can show that they have their arms around the business and are taking care of it very professionally and in sort of an automated way. So I think I've gone a little over. We had a little telecom issue there, but we wanted to, that was a very fast pace in order to make sure we kept to the 20-minute deadline. Are there any questions that have come in, Matt?
Yeah, we've got a few, Mark, so we'll go for a few minutes for sure. One of the questions, it seems, in order to get started, you have to enter your asset information into a DSIM system. So are the assets still input into the system by hand, or is that automated, or maybe is there some hybrid thereof?
Well, it's a combination, and you could jump in here and answer the question as well. So in this particular case, Nlyte allows you to support both. You can choose the assets that are built into the system, but additionally, you can add your own custom assets. So it really, the answer is sort of a hybrid. You can, use the ones, and we have a very large inventory of assets in the system that you can use. But again, you can create your own and put them into the system additionally. So really, sort of the best of both worlds. You can either use the pre-created ones that we populate, or you can use your own.
Yeah, we can answer that question actually for 30 minutes alone, actually. So we could definitely follow up on that. Another one is, in giving detailed rack information where to rack a new server, does the DSIM solution consider cooling in addition to power and other available resources?
Yes is the answer to that question. I don't know if...
I guess it's probably speaking to the questions kind of prompting that, Nlyte considers with our automated asset allocation algorithms. So it considers weight, power, the U locations and sizes. So there's actually many considerations. So I'd have to double check a screenshot. So we can answer that as well. Technically, Nlyte has a patent on that, actually, in the industry. So that's kind of a short but long answer to that one, I believe. And a good question, because, again, that really speaks to number 1 and 2. Next one is, does Nlyte have any available existing integrations with other third-party workflow solutions?
Well, we have integration, pre-created integration into a variety of ITSM systems. So depending on which one you're using, we have pre-built into, for instance, the example I gave before is the workflow that's coming out of an ITSM system that's describing a particular project that needs to be done. It goes into Nlyte, and then our workflow, which is pretty extensive, pretty deep workflow capabilities, we'll take it from there, and again, when completed, we'll pass that information back up to the ITSM system. If the question is, do we support someone else's workflow built into our product, I believe the answer is no.
Not directly. We have modern web APIs. So again, a great question. Our workflow engine, I know, is used by Fortune 2000 companies, and they actually do the opposite. They use the Nlyte workflow outside of the data center, it's quote-unquote that good, so to speak. But again, we can follow up. We can have a whole. We actually do have a whole webinar on just workflow alone with Nlyte 7.5. For the final question, Mark, is a clarification on the power usage scenario. And so this one attendee wants to know: is it that companies are challenged by power limits, or is it the fact of power densities within the data centers that are causing issues? So I think this is a question about what Gartner was getting asked about.
I think it is the power limits, right? It's companies are starting to run out of literally capacity of how do they support the existing capacity they have with all the growth coming down the pike, and they're wondering, what do we do? And so the advice there is often sort of first take a look at the areas where there is power being used for no particular reason, sort of the zombie server scenario. But I think that really that scenario is often we're running up against limits. In terms of dealing with densities, we're tracking that type of information within Nlyte, so you have a good idea of how, of what's going on inside the DCIM system of your different power densities. But the real challenge I think people bring up, and as Gartner mentioned, is really we're going to run out of capacity. How do we continue to support the business if we run out of power?
Yeah, I mean, power density I know is an issue as well, just with cooling, because racks are going up and up in power density. So two distinct issues, but yeah, I think the Gartner was finding that people were just capping out. So great questions. I appreciate them all, as I know Mark does. And with that, I'm going to officially close the webinar. You will have access to this recording and the presentation slides as well. We encourage you to send them to other colleagues of yours. So with that, I'll give a big thanks to Mark for presenting and to everyone on the line. Thank you very much.